So I was confident doing my tutorial. But it's really based.
That's great.
Yeah, really cool.
Right.
But I did a lot of things to have
Right. Yep.
I did that.
It's keyboarding. Yes, right. Yes, that's right.
We're back. We'll have skills.
Right. Sure. Right, they're not nothing. You can figure out how to integrate them into. It's all about the convergence. I mean, do you use one? So is that collaborative?
Oh, there's
We've been
a camera.
developing integrated across the I know, we already talked about how we're,
We are.
we're representing the table.
I don't have my computer.
That's right.
Really.
The most important thing is you output.
Yeah, what I'm really
shopping.
Yeah.
Show me that shoe.
Yeah.
So.
And so what is that?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
So right now I've got teachers.
If anyone.
And librarians working together. Basically finding out what that looks like, what it looks like in the first year, some of your experience, what it look like. In a biology. Basically, we're talking quite a bit about the ability to thoughtful, reflective, smart way. Always require that how that works. It's interesting to see what we have a watch pretty intensively about creating we've done a lot of what's visualizing all of our students.
I have a lot of conversations. Yeah.
Part of it comes a lot of training. Right. Right. That's right. That's right. And computers and skirts.
You're very welcome.
There's your name tag.
Right here. I've got a green one.
Yeah.
I guess you're. Mine is.
I see. So you get multiple colors that you can mix them together.
from the last, and it's about citizenship data. We just talked about this white ass. Value two, these value, break out my whole non-fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't belong on work. That's what prepare them to do. And they find ways around it. So that's the context of any area. Right.
Do not think about the conclusion.
Yes, that's right. Over here.
Well, we were fluttering at this. Oh, well, yeah, like one smoke, and they came like 2 hours. So, like our advisory committee, so they're 5 minutes. All right, now we're talking, yes, we're talking about advisory committee. So, at least I wasn't trying to be like, exactly. So at least I wasn't trying to teach like,
Good morning to all. Good morning. How many of you are sitting at a table with people you have never met? Awesome. You are required.
Oh, I guess.
At the table, talking about whatever you would like generally, but let them know kind of where you come in the world. There are, I think we got up to 32 different states and 2 or 3 Canadian provinces represented. So there's a lot of places and people represented here. So chat up, people at your table for a couple minutes, talk about the world of work and where you're from. So take a couple minutes.
science leadership. How do you like it?
I know, which is good.
How else would that's how you
Ever since the second,
Yeah, I teach that's great. So,
yes, Kate.
yeah, so we're just yeah, 4 classes. Was that your key? Yeah. Yeah, we're in a temporary swing space now, which is very interesting. Eventually we'll add. Full.
Yes.
So we don't have a new building after that. See what happens. I'll tell you how. So I taught 4th grade at college, and those kids, those students, so each time eventually have together in one building. And that's what the rest of this is. We've got all the plans all ready to go. So if you know where $50 million is hiding, that's all we need. No, they have said go back building. We will not take money for it. But we'll help you plan everything. You get it all together. Once you find out money. The school district make very clear they don't want to pay. So we might be able to students quite a lot.
Have you heard about something on your table that was really interesting? So you had an interesting job or came from a far flung place? Anyone? Yeah.
Ryan works with most of those outdoor environments, trying to come to education and also out in school, out to realities with water.
That sounds horrible. Your job. How do you get up and go to work every day? That sounds great. Anybody else got something they heard at your table? So you got an interesting job?
We have remarkable level of diversity at our table. We're from 4 different states. We're teaching in public and private. We are from conservative and from liberal communities, and we're all struggling with the same.
Somehow I knew that was going to be. I'm so glad to know. Anybody else hear something interesting? Yeah.
I think it's kind of neat that and I we're in 2 different states, but we're both trying to shift the culture of our school and the problems that we're having with parent and teacher buy-in to switch to the inquiry and project-based learning.
You mean they don't just immediately go, this is the best thing ever? If only it was like, like you did. It's work. Definitely work when you start doing something like this stuff. Anybody else hear something interesting at the table?
This is the first time in our table.
Yeah, let's ask that. Who's first time Educon ever? Yeah. I know there's at least one person here who's been to all 10, other than myself. But yeah, I know there's somebody in here at least been to 8 or 9. Anybody's yeah, I was gonna say. I was like, I couldn't remember.
It was kind of fun, it was brand new veterans, and we're all excited to be here.
Yeah. So this is the 10th Educon. You're sitting in a school that's 11 years old. So aware of it shows that it might be longer, but I was a teacher here for 4 years, and still continue to work with the SLA family of schools in opening more schools inside the city. So we have middle school that just opened this year, a second high school that opened 3.5 years ago, and then this campus is 11. So we've got quite a constellation of going on in the city with that. My professional work right now takes me into, I think I added it up last year, something like, I don't know, 16 states last year, and I've worked with, I think it was over 1,000 teachers last year in at least 16 different states. There's some really interesting conversations happening out in the world around systemicness, but also, what's the shared experience, even though we have a diverse set of conditions that we teach. And then the conversation for today comes directly out of, anybody want to guess why I would choose Civility and Citizenry? Anyone know what I used to teach? History of government. I'm very much playing to type right now. But I talk about this a lot, and hilariously, I had this conversation 4 years ago when there was a serious concern about the level of civility and the role of citizenry 4 years ago. And I was like, we're still needing to revisit that particular conversation and have some of the stickier conversations around what is your role? What does it look like at school? I think many school campuses struggle with that particular dynamic between kids this school year in some new and challenging ways. And so I got a bunch of questions. I got some information to share, but largely I try to run a very, very conversation-driven session, so there'll be a lot of chatter on your side of things. I would like it, here, I'll throw some stickies around. I literally will probably throw some of these. My aim's off. I used to throw stuff around my classes all the time. Too much time in the roll. Just jot down for a minute when you thought about coming to this session, either a sentence or a word around what you're most concerned about. When somebody says, let's talk about, civility and being a citizen, what are your major concerns, or what's your big questions, or what do you think about when somebody brings that up? You guys need some in the back there? Okay. Let's jot down some ideas.
All right, say that again. Let's just pretend I was listening and want to hear it.
Dr. McClurkin. I'm going to need full attention.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you think about somebody that says, let's talk about civility and citizenry, what are the major issues you think, kind of major issues that you need to consider, or that comes to mind for you, either in your workplace or as a person in the world right now? So I know I have a lot of questions, but I would love to hear what you guys are thinking about when you said, I'm going to go sit in here. What were you thinking would be important to discuss? And then chat it up at your tables a little bit. Go around and share an idea. When here's a moment. If you hear something common, like you heard somebody say something you wrote down, denote it somehow, circle it, or somehow note if you're seeing common threads.
Okay, I got two. How can people respect and focus with views repugnant to and how can people agree
Making sure our discussions aren't single-sided, but ensure that the other side is heard and heard fairly. I feel like we can trend very easily to one direction, and the other side is never heard, never thought about it. It's like, well, we're just gonna write them off, and I'm really worried about that whole, like, well, we're just gonna write them off.
that's sort of what I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you certainly?
Also, and also the part of the problem that probably should be solved. That's part of teach the history of slavery, right? So I'm used to having tough conversations, right? But tell the students there's a range of answers that are part of the operation. There are answers that are speech that is separate.
It's much easier than
And that's what sometimes
doing that.
you have to go back to it. Backwards.
You know, it's one of the things.
At a time when the models do not reflect where they want things to end up. And I think it's just part of the reason. Having tough conversations feels much harder than it did 6 months ago.
That was my point, and that is stuff.
Right.
So it doesn't get discussed at all.
Right. Not even in the same way that, you know, when I went to school, it was like Americans believe, Americans about, you know, you can have this question, get a white type of
And I think that's that idea is like, well, you have to be defined in this higher level of care. Yes, yeah. Has to be levels of opinions and so where are you keeping
I'm not.
Right. California, I'm sure. Wait, what happened?
Yeah.
They kept adding a million votes every couple of days for Hillary.
Yeah.
The election was over. I do, but that's because I have family. Yeah, because I have a number of former students that I have that I keep, in some ways, I keep myself.
I
I'm very
also thought
intense.
about what my father
Yeah.
response, because he was FDR's longest identified. I hippies.
Right. That is
It was so.
parallel. So it's about protecting students. So it's helping students figure out how to they don't be able to shelter them. So I also build up their but that's not about saying it's about right. It's about this is
Bring up points, cite facts,
Right.
actual facts,
Right.
you know, and certain data.
Right about that. Right, so that's the system it's hard to find a place. We talk about
Okay, guys, we're ready back together. So, what was a common theme at your table? What's something that came up that was common? Andy?
Just kind of looking at as faculty to really engage with difficult conversations with ourselves as well, so that we can really then engage with our students. We voted maybe on both sides of the aisle, and really not only just not railing against one side, but really understanding the other side as well. So having some empathy for kids that, you know, I assume that we're from back to school every day, so we got rid of school by November.
Yep.
And so that's not good. That's not what our about. That's not what our about. So I think we really just look for this to think about actual items that we can bring to the table.
Well, I think that the important part is who are you as an adult person in the world, as a human being that's not your job? And then who are you in your job? And then what is your interaction with children? And I think that that is a really difficult space for people to move through that may not, like, I feel like I've been moving through that space as a social studies teacher my entire career. And I was really mindful about a lot of those things all of the time because the minute I lived in communities that were very partisan split, like 50-50, many of the communities, not this one, but many of the communities I worked in were very mixed politically. And so I felt like every time I would trend in a direction, or I had interjected my personal opinion into any of it, some parent would be upset and then we couldn't do interesting things in my classroom. So I was always really mindful of that space. But I think everybody now that is in connection with schools and kids is now finding themselves trying to navigate that space. And it may be new territory for some people. What do you guys talk about? That's kind of common amongst your four experiences.
Yeah, it needs to become what you're talking about in terms of that space, but it being a safe space and us having to train ourselves to create these safe spaces because school should be the absolute safest place for kids to talk about this because this is the time that they're the most naturally inquisitive in their life. So why are we shying away from these things?
How do you turn into the hard place, the hard conversation, create safe space for it, and not just have the outlier kid that feels like he's going to be ridiculed for having other things that were kind of common in conversation.
We have to, coming off of that, where the teachers are having difficult conversations. The kids never see those difficult conversations modeled. So are you brave enough to have those difficult conversations in front of kids? You know, where they can see this civility.
Yeah, well, the question is, how would they know how to act? You know, like, where are they seeing that behavior model, and how might we find some better ways to actually see that? Does anybody have examples where they've seen some of these start? I'm a super dork, so I know one place I go for this stuff. But
Well, the other day, our students were talking about the Women's March, and this is fourth grade, and our students started making very personal comments about the president, and I shifted a little bit and I said, now hold on a second, because I hear two conversations. I hear you attacking the person, and then I hear you attacking policies and facts. I said, so let's talk about that. I said, because as future leaders, all of this and go forward, you need to know how to ground yourself in a conversation so that way you're separating the person, the judgments of the person, and the judgments of the policy. So kind of go back to what you were saying, is who we are in these different places. So that's one experience we've had, just
right, and trying to frame that up so they feel like they have a way to have a difficult conversation in more organized ways and kind of sort through what's what and where's where. I listen to Intelligence Squared. Anybody listen to this? Again, lots of podcasts. But there is a very robust exchange, policy-driven ideas, where you can hear people intelligently disagree with each other and not make it about personal attacks and judgment. And it's pretty organized. I don't know. Y'all could probably sit through it. I'm not sure there's many kids prior to the age of 18 that would find an hour of this interesting. But if, you know, an exchange in there, you can say, like, this is what an academic disagreement looks like. This is people disagreeing about something but staying civil to each other as human beings. And, you know, trying to find some more examples of that. I also ran the debate club. Our kids were very good at understanding a counter position, because when you walk into our style of debate, you got handed your position and you had to be ready to go on either side. And that kind of perspective taking was, I mean, I've had more feedback almost than anything than from my former debaters that particular skill set served them like a Swiss Army knife all the way through college and getting a job. Like, they said that particular skill set was really helpful to them. But yeah.
I wonder, even if it forced them to tears, listening to something like that to understand this debate is different than entertainment. I think
Those aren't the same thing, Wendy?
right.
Oh.
So much debate as entertainment that it creates that I might be okay to be bored by policy that realize that it's not something.
Well, and that there is a way to have a moment where you appreciate that it's not, like, you actually appreciate that it's not
Yes,
show.
exactly.
That you don't try to fake entertainment by, you know, like, this is dense and hard and a big time thing, but Intelligence Squared has like a long list of different debates you can pull from, and you know, it's some heady stuff, but they put out some really provocative, interesting questions for people to ponder. Yes, sir.
Something that I've had a lot of fun doing, and it was really great for my kids, is when I taught history, my partner and I would sometimes use our planning just to drop each other's class, just to see what they were talking about and then argue about it.
Sure.
And so just having your colleagues come in and like, you can stage an interruption just so you can have a 15-minute like shouting match at each other, and then that disperses, and then you talk with your kids about, like, okay, so sorry about that. You know, what did you guys think about that? And then they're like super engaged because two teachers are screaming at each other and throwing facts at each other, and you know, at the same time, then you can model what a good discussion.
Well, that goes to Sylvia's point. You know, how would they know how to have this conversation if we don't actually have tough conversations in front of them? Other ideas that were common at your conversation statement.
We were talking about encouraging students to compete between each other, and specifically talking about their presence on social media and the examples that they've been seeing recently that aren't so positive. So how are you supposed to talk to students about having a good online presence when there are role models that didn't?
Well, it could be a really interesting conversation of, in the public sphere, who is demonstrating civility and who is not, and really looking definitionally at what does that word mean, and then how are you seeing it demonstrated through social media, and having them maybe rate themselves, like, and where that is. And, you know, we're going to get into kind of the nuances of the word, but of course, in all this stuff, I find myself defining things at some point. I'm like, where's the definition? You know, in Google, when you say, like, define whatever word, and then they show use over time, this is interesting. It looks as though we've discussed civility at a much higher rate at different points in the history of the world. And there's an uptick recently, but what do you think the uptick is related to? The welcome, I think, is what it is. You know, when I first did a presentation on this years ago, this was 4 years ago, there was a study that came out about this, and this was the data then. I cannot imagine where we find ourselves today if we were to ask the same set of questions. I mean, we were already at 95% believe we have schools from there. 4 years ago, that's 20 years ago.
So I do think I'm a historian, so I part of this is I go back in some ways, these are not sort of new conversations.
Agreed.
Right? So I have
Thank you, historian.
I have students reading newspapers from Thomas Jefferson's presidency,
Yep.
right? And there's some horrific stuff that,
Yeah.
that the early parties said about each other, right? And have students take that and try to say, so how do these things fit today? How do you push these things forward? Why do you think this happened? How does this emerge?
Right, and where did we go from there?
That's
And how did we go from
That's
there?
right. How did political discourse change?
As a
right?
result
How
of-
did we because of a reaction against?
Right, so sometimes just educating kids it might feel new right now, but it may not be actually all that new. And really using historical record as long as it exists, to actually go back to, I'm just loving it, a lot of guys last night. But really go back to the historical record and see when we've seen a level of ire and kind of discontent and disagreement. I mean, there's some pretty there's some rocky times around World War I, World War II. I looked at somebody the other day when somebody was kind of getting a little red in the face and just couldn't quite get their breath about some of the stuff that was happening, and I said, "You're a country that had a House Un-American Activities in my parents' lifetime." The House Un-American Activities Committee, where they hold people in front of Congress for not being American enough. Like this is we've been to a level of incivility before that, or counter citizenry kind of activity before, and we did find a different path. So not to devalue what's going on, but rather to put it into historical context, I think can be a way as well. Yes, ma'am.
But the distribution of that information today, like in the paradigm shift, right? Like that might have happened, but
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. Is it, and how does the role of 24/7 media cycle, the distribution of a wide-ranging level of truth, and then who's distributing it, and who's an expert, and who's not. And these are conversations we've been having in this community a long time about expert status, and when you say something, how do you know more than somebody else? You get as big of a platform as somebody else just because you got loud. I mean, the rise of Milo Yiannopoulos is extraordinary in the scope of influence that he has to turn a national conversation. If you guys don't know who Milo Yiannopoulos is, he's a Breitbart contributor. He will say anything. Like, I really think he will say anything to get a reaction. And he's been given a platform, and he is loud. And people think that because he's loud, he's expert, and has some opinion. And I said, why are you listening to this voice? And it's because it's loud enough and distributed, and so.
do you think there's a difference between that it makes a difference that some of these sources have an agenda versus some, like there's an island off Turkey or something where the kids just make up headlines because they're getting Google ad clicks and they know it's wrong and they don't care. They're just selling crap,
Well,
I think it matters.
I don't know. I think it matters to try to understand what's going on, because I don't think you turn out of this if you don't quite grasp what's causing it. So I think there is that level of, we're just going to print up crazy stuff to get clicks. I am going to use this platform to say crazy things because I'm establishing a brand for myself. I have a political agenda and I'm trying to manipulate people into believing things that are quasi-true. And I'm trying to present an objective set of facts. Like, I think that trying to,
And again,
First
it's not
that?
new. I mean, it's like
No.
first in the Spanish Civil War. It's like,
absolutely, but how are we in a different place? Because they still had to go through the newspapers to get that information out. There was still some channel through which information passed that at least meant some level of authority, I guess. Right, and so what was the role of media, and how has that just completely been distributed? We'll go here and then that.
Part of it is that we're in such overload right now, and as adults, it's too much. We're taking it too much, and I can't even imagine being a student, because before you didn't have access to knowing what someone in Kansas really
Blissfully
did.
ignorant about
But
that,
now,
yeah.
anytime there's an article, you click on the comments, and you're constantly mad
Yep.
because you're seeing how this person from Arkansas feels it, and it's just too much.
Yep.
You're altered.
So the thing that I've been saying to people who are currently distressed about what's happening in the country and consuming the information one tweet at a time. I said, you have to figure out you got to figure out how to temper your rage button, because there's going to be an unending, a colleague of mine says he has an unending well of a rage button again, and I was like, I do not. But I said, it's like 1,000 paper cuts a day. I said, I choose just one shot straight to the face. Like, I'm gonna read the news once a day right now, because I can't take it in tweet by tweet, comment by comment. Like, if you're trying to consume information like that right now, and you live on, a far spectrum of, it's gonna be hard to keep your, so if you're a child, and the only thing you've ever done is turned on a big faucet of information in your brain, and now you're being bombarded with either stuff that you agree with or disagree with. Either way, there's a thing going on there, and there's a lot of complexity.
Well, I mean, it's actually perfect you said that, that's exactly what I was gonna say, was that with that unending faucet, the other thing that happens is that we almost end up completely ignoring what happens is that objectivity is still subjective. And that people are going to bring their own biases, even totally unrealized. I can only say things that I've seen with my eyes, and I haven't seen everything. And I'm always going to be speaking from Olivia's point of view.
Sure.
It doesn't matter, no matter how objective I'm trying to be. And so, unfortunately, now we're in this situation where even the objective ones, we don't even have time to talk about how they might be accidentally subjective, because we're just so overloaded by being like, well, no, that's crazy. And I just need to stick to this, and I don't have that much space to analyze my quote unquote good news as much as I should.
Anybody see this article come out? This was just this morning. It's on Snopes. But so this was an interesting moment. Snopes was a tough hit. Same paper, different story. And it's a mixture of truth and false. And so this is what's interesting. What is true is that the Wall Street Journal put out 2 different covers. What is not true is they put out 2 different covers to different markets. This was different print times. So their early print was one, and then something had happened, and it shifted the title. But what was being distributed on social media was that they were selling this in different markets and manipulating people's perception. But that's not exactly what was happening. And unless you read very closely, you're going to be sucked into, oh yeah, Wall Street Journal, and it's like, it's an interesting thing that they do this, and it's worth talking about, but it's not exactly what you think, and so that just understanding just the layers of how deep this stuff is.
This kind of brings me all back. I'm just curious, raise the hands, how many of your schools have a professional librarian certified?
Me.
That's exactly, because it's like we all see this and we're like, oh my God, but for a kid to understand this and that image of the faucet, they don't know. They don't know what they're going to run with it, and where we become so good at just putting quick clips out on the web and believe it, you take it, you consume it, and we just consume it. But how do you differentiate? How do you?
Well, where does it live all through history?
Right.
It is a gift to have someone whose whole profession is steeped in that. But I'll tell you, there are 8 librarians in 220 schools.
And it's become, do you realize how important this is? I don't
Yeah,
mean
more
to
so.
I think it needs to be taught within content areas, and in addition, even make it separate, and there's curriculum out there, just keep looking at information. What is the purpose? What is the motivation?
Why might they be writing that? Why did that happen?
To that point as well, the library should not just be this place you go to, it should be turned throughout the entire school. And I think that's where we sometimes think the library has a place as opposed to,
As an idea.
as Chris says, oxygen.
Right. It's a curriculum, yes.
So I also think this unending cost is also creating a need for students to respond quickly. Where I think an important role of ours is to provide us students with the space and the time to sort of think through a response. Teach them that maybe the first thought that bubbles up isn't the thought we're posting or expressing.
What, you're supposed to reflect and then react? How last century? No, it's absolutely, and to the point of what do you do to get kids that skill? I used to have kids online that have been through my class. I used to joke that my class was how not to be a sucker for the rest of your life. Like that was the subtitle of my class. Like, don't be a sucker. Like, do not fall for this stuff. Dig a little deeper. Ask some more questions. And I would have kids that were through my class, and then their friends on Facebook would be posting suspect things, and they would start posting things like, "You got a second source for that? I'm not finding that anywhere else." And they started like running through with their friends a checklist of how not to be a sucker. But it was just this really funny. I would just laugh every time I see one of these things because they did have a skill set to ask some deeper questions and actually, it's innate for them if you do it enough to be like, who wrote that? Where did that come from? Where's the primary source? We do activities like using. We go to the museum. And look at their front pages. And we would pull a regional story, a story from another part of the country, and an international story all about the same subject. And a kid would read each one and talk about the facts. And then when they were different, you'd say, who's right? Is this true? What is the truth that this is saying that is different, but did anybody actually lie? And what is that? And how might we be aware of it, and so that perspective taking. So the front pages that they put up for the museum, you can search map-based all over the world. They put them up every day.
There's a lot, there's a curriculum coming out in March. I'm just trying to look for it. If you guys want me to tweet out a list of different things.
That would be super librarian superheroes.
That's what I'm supposed to do, right?
Yes, please do. Share away.
UNESCO is a really great. UNESCO.
Yep.
UNESCO prepares that has a media and information literacy curriculum.
Yeah.
Does that like sort of bridge our whole conversation?
Right,
How
and so-
important,
Right, so that's a piece of it. So this whole idea of how, so the reason I said I put civility and citizenry together is because it's a really two-part thing. It's how do you engage in real conversation civilly, and then how do you actively participate as a citizen? And then you get to ask fun questions like, like this question. What is that? How do you do that? If you are bumping up against incivility and you bring civility, is it bringing, a butter knife to a gunfight? What do you do when you're in a comment section and somebody's just throwing, we run into my and will just say the most extreme, awful thing? You disengage. You engage further, what risk you put, there is some, that's what kids are bumping up against, in this situation as well. So when they can be media savvy, they can call out somebody like, I don't think this is true, but what if they're like, you're just from the left, or you're just from the right, and you're not a thinking person, and it starts to become this other kind of personal attack, what do you do when you bump up against the incivil side of this thing, and you're bringing sunshine and rainbows, that's not necessarily the thing.
I've been thinking a lot about how there's information literacy and all that as a skill, but then really to me, emotional self-awareness is huge and is essential because so at my school I work with kids who all have experienced some trauma and they're constantly in fight or flight or freeze mode. And I think that all of us in some ways right now feel like fight, in one of those.
There's a lot of F's being used.
Yes, there's a lot of
I would agree with that.
And when you're in that mode, you can't use your logical questions and you can't do analysis because you're just trying to survive. And so I think about really teaching what is an emotion, how do I tell which emotion I'm having? I feel like a big ball of this, but is this angry or is it scared or is it uncertain? And I think those are really the core skills that then allow you to have a conversation with someone that's not just about I feel like I'm gonna die and so I have to bring a gun to the gunfight.
Right.
But to be able to get to a place where you can say, I'm okay. let's talk about this.
Yeah. Well, and really, there's some cases that this kind of ire that's being floated in the youth is causing quite a bit of anxiety and tension. You know, and on both sides. If you live in a household like I grew up in, that's very politically right-leaning, and you go to school and you might walk into a school that's very left-leaning, that's got to cause some tension. You know, and it's not right, wrong, or otherwise. You know, how do you create the safe space idea for all ideas? Because I certainly don't control what my parents think, unfortunately. And you really have to be able to navigate some really tricky space for kids to feel like they're safe and that they don't have to come to school and feel like they're in this fight or flight space because of ideas that are dissonant from home, and how do you navigate that? Grab it.
It's another idea of information literacy here. Primary sources are necessary. But I just had, I work at also, and students, there's the person who a bunch of teachers went to the SEC and there was student leadership and they came back and they did a workshop with teachers, and it was very insightful and like eye-opening because they had us like as teachers go back and forth like where do we fall and like do you have your finger on the pulse of like our community and like a lot of people like how
your lived experience is not your kid's lived experience, and how do you make sure
right
the
and
same
some of them were
vendors there
saying like they wanted us to they wanted our opinion, our feedback about do we think they feel has something so they can go to an advocate. Like is there someone or can they go to any teacher and just have a conversation? And I think those relationships are so important.
Well, and here that's called the ethic of care, which is baseline for, it's a hierarchy of needs. If they don't feel safe, they don't feel like there's a place that cares about them, and that they have an advocate here, it's a pretty ugly place for kids to be interacting. I know, and then how do you change culture around that? Okay, so pause for a second. We're gonna have some table conversations. This is all lovely, but we need more of it. So let's chat up. Let's see. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about a little bit of practicality. Like, what are you doing on your school site? Like, what have you seen work to either engage kids in an active role as citizen, to encourage civility between kids? Like, what are some things, either super classroom-based or more school system-based or programmatic or one-off experiences? I'll offer this one. The one I talk about a lot is I used to send, Philadelphia didn't have school on election day, and all of my students would go to the polls. They would do voter interviews. It was hilarious in a lot of ways for a number of different reasons, but it would be roughly 125 kids out in the city at all the different polling places in their local communities, engaging with the process, not because I wanted them to go and vote, because that wasn't the deal necessarily, unless they were 18, but I did not want them, the very first time that they went to go vote, to have no idea what they were doing. And I said, so go there, see the thing, cross the threshold of the place, watch the process, and figure it out. I called it like practicing citizenship. You know, like this was your citizenship homework. We're gonna go practice how to do the thing because so many people just never cross that threshold. And we got a bunch of information back from that. That was one concrete example that I used as a teacher. What are some other ones? We're gonna get a list going of some different things that you've seen work in your educational spaces. So. Jeff's like, we don't do anything. Do you have any questions about that?
Yeah, I mean, so.
Okay.
So, workplace, experience email, especially for learning building read between the lines of some of these things, along the way, and then to back at practicality. And so to have kids have those experiences, they're assuming we're trying to say and find ways to connect with that person, back and asking them questions. So are you saying this or are you saying that? I used to set it up where it's about questions somewhere. We're gonna have some kids have face to face they're nice people. So all of a sudden, they wouldn't always go to there's a last thing they want to do is something else about so we haven't had that debate. We haven't faculty I'd actually somebody teach about black women, black men, whatever, for hundreds of years. So I did that. So all the
Yeah.
I would tell people like this is a long way, especially when we pick up this program where you with them, you know how that I wasn't saying that ideas that we have so yeah, we have a time where you don't have high school showing up at the first yeah, I used to I did the last class for 3 years. A lot of years I had multi-age groups. I had parents with different missions that I was saying, great stuff. Yeah, well, when we did on, I find the school teacher and I do that kind of stuff. And certainly I love them and blogs. So this is a teacher in her classroom that you can blog on. Twitter or whatever, we talked about that together, right? Public schools, that's a First Amendment. All we have to do is lock it on wireless. That's not how most people access it anyway, right? So, but we did have some basically
Black Lives Matter.
Get 5 down to disappears.
Black Lives Matter. And so each day we took 3 words from the Black Lives Matter movement. So like Monday we looked at loving engagement, restorative justice, and empathy.
We did. That
We
was
talked about like what these words mean, what these words look like. And you know, we did 5th grade, so like still reading stories to kids where we had like a picture book on the other side, like that's what it looks like. Talking about this like hours and wires with understanding how like something like you have to surround what it is.
to figure out this.
Outside, right? And all the words that people would say about how they saw them from the outside. And on the inside, like drawing it apart, and saying what's on the inside is really important to know about you once you got to know who you are and the person you are. Because now I've got like 45 prints, like hanging from the ceiling, and for like them to see, like to know the different things about one another, maybe I didn't know about campus. So it's those kind of lessons that we did all week before, like focused on different words that really like help us like understand diversity. We read the last stop on Market Street about diversity of all different forms, what it looks like, and how it's moving our community, how we can respect that, how we can be inviting and lovingly engaging in those modes. One of the most powerful ones is that was on Wednesday. We did collective value along with trans affirming and queer affirming. And my students are mostly African American, and there's a lot of homophobia in the African American community. And we read in our mother's house, like Morocco, and talked about like raising two women as mothers and loving relationships like that. And just to hear the students talk so openly about that and like their acceptance of it. And I was thinking like, I couldn't imagine having a discussion like this in my class 5 years ago. I could never imagine having a discussion like that when I was a student in school. Like, it just wouldn't have happened. So like, to think about like those kind of structures and those kind of ways that we can set up our students for that, and talking about putting on these ideas and doing these activities in our classroom, it allows them to like have these conversations and think about these. I find really helpful, especially at this like third age of like 9, 10, 11 years old. Forming their ideas, they're not formed yet, because they can be so impressionable.
As we chat about some of the ideas that are popping around the room, we'd love you guys, if you have links to resources you think were interesting, or just, write down a few words about something that's worked for you. But we're gonna talk about it while people are adding information up here. So what's one thing that popped up? Let's talk about an idea that wasn't yours that you heard at your table. That was interesting about some approaches that people have taken here, and then for those of you who are listening and want to multitask, and throw some of the other ideas.
We have a Google Doc. What's the Google Doc?
So I am on Twitter. I also hashtagged it. And it looks like our anonymous walrus is all. Okay, so ideas that you guys had, and something interesting you heard at your table about a practical approach to dealing with some of this stuff. Yes.
So Charlotte at her school, they actually had somebody in to teach the students and the teachers how to do executive functioning stuff, so that the kids know how to manage their feelings, and the teachers and time management and how to function as a citizen in school and manage their time.
Okay. Other things practically that were going on in a school setting, something interesting is going on.
Two of the schools that are able have advisory programs, and that advisory program kind of helps set norms for the school in terms of how students interact with one another and how those students interact with their classrooms, their school community, and wider community.
Yep.
We also have school-wide social programs, so same language in the classroom every year, so that students are able to carry over the classroom. And it'll be the same no matter what the teacher would have, the expectation that the same no matter what the teacher would have.
Okay. Other things. Yes.
Something that we found that was really simple is just as early as you can work it into your kids' curriculum, working in seminar skills and having conversational skills, because one of the things that Jennifer mentioned earlier was that a lot of our students in middle school don't know how to have a conversation. They don't know the rules to have a polite.
Why is that? How do we get there? They text, and what's the other part of it? What's their role as oftentimes as a student?
They don't really.
There's a super passive student role here. Super passive. They have not been actually, like when I talk to some people, I'm like, no, when do kids actually hear their voice out loud in your class? So like I would look at people like, whoa.
And not be punished.
Right, and it not be a negative thing. Like what is that, that with both an expectation and a positive behavior and how do you intentionally plan for kids to hear themselves discuss academic things. Anybody go to the middle school yesterday? Joe, you don't count.
I was there.
Wow.
They're all day.
So, what did you notice about the fifth graders you chatted up while you were there? And in response to whether or not they could have a conversation?
They blew me away. Honestly, because they knew this skill. They had the skill set to jump in and have a conversation. Our tour guide had.
Do you remember your tour guide's name?
Malia.
No, Melania, maybe?
Melania.
She was, sorry.
Melania.
Melania. The pink bow
Yeah.
yesterday.
Super cute.
She
But
was on point for her role yesterday.
even though, as a kid, she still had the ums and had to catch herself. But she was ready to jump in and say. There was also, I was looking at the water cycle models, and I tweeted it out, and I was just looking at one, and this girl was like, just came right up and was like, so this is what we're doing, and just was so excited to share, and had no problem explaining in an organized fashion, whereas I'm not sure my 8th graders can do that.
So, when did school open, Jeff?
Yes.
When did the school open?
Oh, in September.
Right,
September
because I was
7th.
here in the summer, and so
Right.
Oh, okay. That's right. Well, yeah.
learning about.
So, this isn't something like they've been here forever. The school literally opened its doors September 2016. And what's fascinating to me, because I went on a tour yesterday, even though I'm the person who 4 years ago started the process to start the school. I know all about the school, but I went on a tour yesterday to kind of see what they say and how it went. And I was out with Malik most of the time, and
You jumped in with her.
very excited to be a tour guide. But I think we vastly underestimate their capacity. It was always there. They needed permission and support to be those kids. There isn't some, super concerted effort for them to develop there's no, it's the core values is what, for us, what gets you there. It's to say to kids, no, I love your questions. What do you got? How are you gonna work with people? And then the sharing and the reflection part of it. But this is 10-year-olds, 5-6 months in, and that's what's so fascinating to me is that sometimes people believe that the only way to get to that place is that you have to have really specific conditions, or a lot of money, or a lot of people. No, the kids just have to have permission to be those kids, and then supportive staff around them to actually ask them to engage like that.
Part is we don't have, I'm in German with Kristen, and we don't have the support staff, it's the staff by them. So if you only have one allowing this, then it doesn't give those kids the time to develop those skills or even give them, no matter how safe your classroom is, because it's not a safe environment overall.
So what the point being that, how do you both make your school, like your classroom space this? Then what are some of the systemic things you can do as a school to also move in this direction? And then how do you get people to believe that their job is to care for children and not just tell them things? That is a really tricky thing. And you're gonna get into some interesting space with civility and citizenry if you don't actually think your job is empowering students and letting kids hear their ideas. Right?
So, absolutely, you've got to give kids those opportunities. So, I know in my experience, my class went one-to-one laptops about 10 years ago at 100% free lunch school, and high numbers of DSL students. And we had an opportunity early in the school year, before we practiced a lot of those skills, of having a news team come to our classroom, because we were a one-to-one laptop school, and that was like nobody was doing that. And so all my kids wanted to be interviewed, and when that microphone went in front of their mouth, it was like very low voice, lots of, and it was embarrassing for the kids. And so I was able to tie that in, and it was amazing how when you give kids reason to discuss things and have an opinion, having them blog all the time was a big part of that, because they're learning the social media skills part of that. It's not always just oral. That kids make the mistake, lots of times adults too, of reading things between the lines that aren't there. Well, he said this in that comment, so he's dissing me about, well, no, it's not there at all. And so let's get back, is that what that person's really asking you? And have them have those experiences, and then role play how to talk to somebody about things, because in their lives, they're used to everybody being in everybody's face, but to actually be able to talk civilly to somebody and you be the one that calms them down. It was always, because it was a high-risk school, we had a pretty high turnover, and it was always interesting to watch when we get new students come in. Certainly not every single one of them would have issues with that, but how they get, assumed into the classroom, into that culture that we had built and spent a lot of time at.
So one of the things I heard you say, which I think is super important, is the authenticity of that very first task that you talked about brought about an innate wanting
Exactly.
to do something differently and
They wanted
develop
to
a
do
skill
that,
set
yes.
because it came from this other place. And so some of this stuff, when you're asking this question, is how much of this actually feels real to them and feels like it's got some teeth to it. I used to send it to my citizenship homework was always go to the polls, pick a public meeting to attend, to which they'd almost always say, for the love, why did you make this a public meeting? This it was awful. And I said to them, well, yes. I said, however, when you're very upset about something and you want to air your opinion, I don't want you to not know how to navigate that. Because they were like, are you aware that at the school district, you have to apply 24 hours ahead of time to even talk, and then when you do talk, only 3 minutes? They were like, 3 minutes. They were just all like, that's shady behavior. They had all kinds of about that. And, one of the very funniest things I ever got a kid coming back from the school district meetings was, so I said, how'd it go? And she was like, that was a long 2 hours. And I said, so what was the most interesting thing? She goes, well, I noticed they were using PowerPoint wrong. I said, what was most wrong? She goes, it was 5 really small text jammed onto one side, and then they were just reading it. And I was like, and then she says, because the kids are empowered and trend sometimes across that line to entitlement, she goes, there was a break in the middle, and I thought about going up to ask the speaker if they wanted some help. And they had to walk in with the sheet sign that they were there to have my name all over it. I was like, you didn't actually do that. Did you? She goes, I thought better of it. But it was that very real experience for her. And the authenticity that goes with that, and then they internalize I know how to go to a public meeting. I've seen that before. So that as much as possible, trying to think of real times that kids can practice that thing. We did a service learning one, a public meeting, and go to the polls. And then the fourth quarter, they could pick any version and repeat one of those. And they had all 4 to do it, and it was a standing assignment, and they managed it on their own time, and it was pretty great. And kids would have these really hilarious conversations about what they went out into the world and learned about these things. Because then they'd sit at tables and trade ideas about what their public meeting was like, what they learned from that, and that's a really the authenticity piece that Brian spoke about is super important.
I just wanted to ask a question about how to create that feeling. It's all those things that you're talking about. I'm like, oh gosh, that sounds so amazing. But I work with elementary schoolers. So how do I create that feeling of authenticity with elementary schoolers? Sometimes as young as kindergarten, sometimes as old as 4th grade, but anywhere in between when they can't go out.
Right, where they're not doing things independently.
Yeah.
So
You should tell your story, the
I was gonna
story
say,
you told
who's got
us.
an idea?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't in elementary.
I just volunteered for a third grade story.
Third time.
So I'm in a different school in New York, and trying to hear the other side of the election story was a challenge. And so one of our 3rd grade teachers took a New York Times article about someone on his motorbike who rode through the country and mapped where he saw a Trump sign versus a Hillary sign. And so then what this teacher did was give the students a map of America, and every state that he saw more Trump signs in, they had to tally that up
and color those states in. And so what was interesting is the students started to see through a math class how the country had different views from probably most of them and their families. And so it was an interesting way through a sort of interdisciplinary way to try and highlight like the conversation that was perhaps different from what our students were used to.
But I think that's what real social scientists do. That's what grown-up social scientists do. And, you know, finding a version of that for third grade is
And then modeling that and a way to empower them to develop that skill set, to practice it over and over and over again. Jeff?
Yeah, so my wife has taught a bunch of different elementary school levels, but at every level, she invites the school board members into her classroom. And so the children actually meet school board members fairly early on. They have conversations with them. They ask them questions about what they think is important about school. And she has them talk about what they see their role is, what the role of the school board is, and actually ask them what their education is like. And then they write to local representatives. They write as a class. They write to Congress people. They write. So they're
write about
the issues that matter to them, right? So they're authentic to them and talk about the things that they're concerned about.
This year I teach fourth grade and we did an election to name our new pet bunnies. So they learned how to campaign and how to like debate and how to share their ideas in a way that focused on facts, not opinions. And so they got really into that process and they learned about the branches of government and they learned who their Congress people are and who represents them. And we went and visited the state capitol because
It's a very fourth grade thing.
yes, it's very and at the same time we're learning about, Japanese internment in California. So they're getting to see the different processes of government and it feels real to them because they were very invested in meeting the
I gotta know.
Yes,
what one.
It was sunset and midnight one instead of bumper and bumper. It was very close.
That could go wrong.
Everyone happens.
But then we also did service projects where like we read about things and like they created a lending library, we did a clothing drive and we went on our clothing. So and they write persuasive letters to the principal.
That's what I was gonna ask next, how do you fit it into sometimes what can be a very tight curriculum? Like which subject can you like sneak it into in your lesson plan? Be like, this is legit, so.
Social studies is often an unending well of tangents you can take this on. If you look at most social studies curriculum, which commentary that along for a social studies teacher gets skipped a lot in elementary schools because of the crush curriculars. There is. I am mortified sometimes at how little any of it is ever talked about. Because it's important. And so I think you can run cover right under the social studies standards in any state. They have something that tracks along the lines of, all of the examples that were shared. And then you can also use it as in, text. I mean, a lot of this is close reading.
Yes.
A lot of this stuff, from the, informational and its writing skills, I think that I wish there was a more comprehensive push to use the social studies as a way to get to a lot of reading and writing so that you get that curriculum through some of the other skills, not all of it, but through some of it as a way to touch on some of the stuff. But you run cover right on your standards.
Yeah.
It's there.
Because I've tried to use like the English books that we read, to
Find some places. But service learning stuff is kids really get into that stuff. And that's, early years, that's a really core based kind of citizen maneuver that kids can, relate to and to be of service and do things in the community of service and talk to other organizations that are of service to others. And they're, I think that there's really simple ways are in the, the fourth grade level of branches of government, that theme.
All the people who volunteer on the Skype in the classroom, it might not be government or citizenship, but for younger kids planning, what questions are we gonna ask? How are we gonna ask them? Not a yes or no question. What if someone responds, but they didn't really answer the question? How are we going to
respond to that?
How we respond to that? Recognize that they didn't actually answer it. Right, recognizing they didn't actually answer it, it gets to a lot of that communication skill.
Yeah, I had an interview this week by a group of fifth graders that wanted to know the history of their school over in the school. And it was an intense question, and they were not yes and no. I mean, it was, one of them was, the organization that I run is called Infusing Schools, and that's what hosted and ran the middle school process to have their school start out, and they said, so in your role as the executive, they did this all by themselves, it's what's called a macro project, where they get to kind of do whatever they want to. If one kid is really interested in how the school came to be, so he's doing a little bit of a thinking on how the school came to be. Your role as Infusing Schools executive director, what do you think isn't going well?
Stated by the year.
Thanks, Danielle. This is really great question, and it was pretty hard hitting, and they just all sat there like, we're waiting, you know, it was like, more in-depth questions I came from my forward, you know, and it was just this really great interview moment. But they were curious and they're allowed to go down their own rabbit hole, but, you know, they were their questions. I said, maybe soften that one up a little bit. I was challenging about your one, but it was a really funny moment. It was great interview thing. Any other ideas here for younger kids or kids in general?
Yeah, so I led a project in Nebraska called the Nebraska Books Project, and the idea was started with fourth graders when they started to learn about Nebraska history, that they would create their own ebooks using iBooks Author in particular at the time, and it really allowed the students to work with their local historical societies and dig into kind of local history as far as what they would tell the story of their region. So it's a great way to kind of bridge the divide between the urban areas of Nebraska and the very rural areas, which is a large part of the state. But
you don't say.
You don't say, exactly. But it also gave them some agency in what they wrote about. So you could weave in the ELA, you could weave in the history. Some of them wrote about, I mean, they range. They're still all available on the Nebraska Department of Education website.
I should link that in there. Find people, that'd be great.
Yeah,
I really appreciate that.
But we got to bring them to the Nebraska State Board meeting. They got to go meet the governor, like, celebrated them as authors. They presented at multiple conferences, so it was a really great project to do. And it ranged as far as the goal was for fourth grade, but then we ended up getting kids as young as kindergarten.
So we got about 13 minutes left. So some of the questions, and I can push this out. As you can see, I have very deconstructed. I just love questions during these sessions. So we probably way more planned. So we're just gonna run through a couple of these because I think that these are some of the things that are nagging in this process that we're not certainly gonna answer today. But I think it's important that we start talking with each other about how you're navigating some of this stuff. So, you know, how do we create a civil world for our people, you know, that social emotional side and trauma-informed stuff, you know, like some kids feel very unsafe in the world, be it, as I was talking to them about, kids who have immigration status issues are feeling really unsafe in their world, you know, where kid to kid could be informed upon, you know, like there's probably some really stark conversations going on in some homes with kids, like, you don't talk about family business outside this house, you know, and there's probably a pretty ugly scene for some kids to try to navigate being a person in the world and feeling unsafe. And so, you know, that constant big question. What role does the learning community play in developing these kids? Like, what are you supposed to do at school to help kids be these kind of kids? You know, what kinds of projects are you doing? You know, what are you figuring out as you go along? Talk about this one, talk about that one, that one. There's a great article on the Boston Globe. Without civility, there cannot be stability, renewal, evolution, and change. We've spent the entire session as the adult version of ourselves, not the professional teacher version, to have a conversation about what this particular statement means today. This was written in 2012. If we're at a highly uncivil place, if we're not getting this, what are we getting instead? And what does that mean? And how does that make us feel as humans, but also kids in this space? This is a Boston Globe article from 2012. That one. This is one I think that the United States is having a terrible problem with right now. What do you do in intractable spaces? What do you guys think is the most intractable issue for Americans? Like the one that over time, there's somebody always on one edge and somebody always on the other, and there's almost no ability to have a conversation across the board. So race is one. And what should I say is the other? I'd say that those are probably some of the most intractable issues that exist in our society. And what do you do in moments where people are intractable? What do you do when you get a kid that's intractable? Like they're over here. They have absolutely no desire or empathetic leaning to engage in any kind of conversation about empathy building or position taking or bias understanding. They are all the way in a place. And what do you do in your role as teacher? Manage those spaces, so that people can fix it.
One of the challenges that we're having is, this may be on a broader scale, but are we trying to get people to see a different perspective and maybe change how they think? Or are we just trying to get them to stop saying stuff that's inflammatory because we know that they're not going to change? So for example, with Donald Trump, in my opinion, I don't think he's going to continue, therefore he just counsel him on how to put stuff in there more. And does that count as teaching people how to be civil?
Well, I think that is the thing, is that how do you hold a space that you know is diametrically opposed to someone else, but not be a total ass in doing so? Like, hey, yeah, what does that look like? And how do we practice that? And how do you help people be like, no, I get it. You can hold that place. I get it. But I need you to do it in a way that doesn't blow up the conversation, just make everybody angry, because all you've done is punch the rage button. And people just, gaslight everything and off we go. How do you refocus that? Like, I get where you are. I'm not telling you have to think differently. I'm asking you to engage in a space where both things can live. And I would argue that we're currently trying to figure out if that's what's being pushed out here. So the ability to have a different opinion, or there's just yelling. I don't know. It's an interesting time.
I teach 5th and 6th grade humanities, political studies, and language arts. And so I try and do as much kind of conversation-based and the debate stuff as much as I can. I don't know, for kids, the idea of an intractable issue even really exists, because when they get an opinion, in my experience, lower middle school, 7, 8, even into the upper, when they get an opinion, they want you to be part of that opinion. They want you to validate it. They want you to believe it. They want to convince you of it. There's no such thing as an intractable issue to many young learners. And so it becomes almost more of a competitive, you want to get.
So the only thing I'd push back on is I've taught in several communities where there was a lot of religious space to navigate. I taught in Arizona with a large Mormon population, and in Kansas where there was this pretty Baptist leaning space, and you would get there around issues of religion. Sure. If you brought up abortion in that space, there was an opinion, and they were not interested in having much dialogue about it, because at home there's no right answer to that question. And so part of the struggle is how do you still, sometimes you can just sidestep things there's going to be very little movement on, or do you? I don't know. What do you do around those situations? How do you deal with something when people are just on their side? I would agree for most things. Kids they're very malleable and they're forming opinions, they're doing some interesting things, but for the really edge of the conversation stuff, there's some weird space there.
So I think we have to know ourselves before we enter a conversation, and we have to know all about our own biases and our own worldviews. And when you're aware of those biases, when you're aware of those worldviews, you kind of put your cards on the table, so to speak. And I think that we were saying before that when it becomes emotional, you intellectually leave the conversation, right? Because from then you are coming from an emotional standpoint. Someone is challenging your whole existence and experience. Right. And these debates that we see a lot, like what you were talking about, is those people in those debates, they check out that worldview. Right. And everything becomes a matter of fact. And science and facts, people. But sorry, gotta sneak it in there. Yeah. So I think there is an art of conversation, and I think in conversing we highlight the power of the speaker instead of highlighting the power of the listener. And as the listeners, we can really come into a conversation and guide it where we need it to go, which is in a civil route, but by grounding yourself.
Well, I think that's a super important point that I didn't think of a single time, and anybody who's ever been around me knows that's listening. I talk a lot. The listening aspect of this is what is the role of an active listener in that place? And what's the common thing that people say? People listen to you, not to listen. People listen to respond. And how do you actually say to kids like, I get that thing. There's another way to approach listening, and actually try to give them another tool in the toolbox of how to engage in some of the stuff. You're not listening to necessarily represent your emotional point of view or to prove them wrong. You're actually listening to understand. And and that's a really seriously I forgot
One of
about
the things.
but a huge part of it, pause.
Okay.
Well, my session, Lehman.
I was gonna talk about something you do in your classroom to get people.
3 minutes. We're gonna pause on that, but I wanted to blast through some of the other questions that I had up here. So this is pulled right off of one of the few existing government pages that are still left. There is your rights and responsibilities, and it would be an interesting activity, I think, for the staff to actually think about what do you do in your curriculum to actually address some of this stuff, and really think thoughtfully. Do you do things around this? I mean, this is just off I can post where I got it, but it's there, it's still there. It's a whole PDF. There's and flesh out each one of these. I know it's really exciting. We can evaluate how our political representatives are doing on this right now. But this is important. Thinking about what your role is on this. Deb and I talked about when is civility overrated. Can you be civil and push back against the establishment or an idea that is repulsive and repugnant? What do you do when somebody advocates that your people should die, or that who you are shouldn't be allowed to exist in the world? What do you do? The worst thing I ever had a kid say in my classroom, and this was a long time ago. He was pushing my buttons, and he did it on purpose. But he advocated for a quote open gun season on me. Inside of my classroom, out loud. And he did it partially to get me to go to a bad place. And he actually did read it. His parents offended. But what do you do when you're sitting there as a human and somebody goes to a place where you cannot react in a civil way? And what does that look like? And then who are you as the, how do you disconnect from being the person and try to have some response that's not wrong? I believe my response was, yeah. Very effective. So, this is, we find ourselves in spaces and places, I'd say, that highly challenge some of this stuff for you as a person. And so there's a whole question of self-care around some of this stuff, and how are you going to consume information, what's going to be your process, and how do you limit how it impacts your overall emotional capacity to move through the world right now as a person. And then, how do you help kids with the faucet as well? And then, how do we proactively move forward and get a better bucket of skills, because we are really deficient in our capacity to do this stuff well right now. And how do we retool and use, the millions of kids we have in our system to say, here are some really important things to understand about how to interact with different ideas in the world and how to be responsible. And it's tricky space right now. So this is part of they're the hope. I mean, it's where you have to go. It is this is the part. When you sit there, with a glass of wine trying to reduce the news of the day and stifling both rage and tears, it is the place you go is the part we do have control over. And the part we do have influence over is not to say, I want you to read this political viewpoint. It's, I want you to interact with this as a human. I want you to be civil. And I want you to understand what the role of citizenship is. And I think that we really have the capacity to focus on that as our work. And then also try to take care of ourselves so we're not all being kind of a mess at the end of the day, trying to navigate it ourselves. So time's up. If people want to stay in chat, that's totally fine, but I'm really trying to get out of here right at 11:30. Website's up. If you guys want to throw some more ideas up there, I'll put in the link to the slides in case you want to do some of the questions. Thank you for your time and attention.